And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be. Welcome to today's webinar, Comparing Data Dashboards, the California Prosperity Index and the California Dream Index. I'm Pete Peterson, the very grateful Dean of Pepperdine's Graduate School of Public Policy, coming to you live here from the Dean's Conference Room on our Malibu campus, and delighted to welcome you all into an important conversation about how we understand data, how we can represent it, how we can better inform our residents and increase civic engagement through the effective display of data. This is an opportunity for us here at the Policy School to collaborate with two partners and friends. One, California Forward, a great multi-partisan nonprofit organization based here in California, doing work around economic reform policy as well as political reform, and the Legatum Institute based in the United Kingdom, friends of ours that we've developed over the last year who share our commitment to making public policy more understandable and to apply data in making and forming effective and sustainable public policy. A little bit about our panel for today to introduce our speakers. I begin with Patrick Atwater. Patrick serves as a senior research analyst for California Forward, where he leads the development of the Dream Index and helps support policy analysis across the organization. Patrick brings a decade of experience in data-intensive roles related to California public affairs across a variety of policy issues, from economic development to water policy. Prior to California Forward, Patrick helped envision and build a unique California Water Data Initiative. The CADC Water Data Project has been featured on a variety of media news outlets. Patrick has a longstanding passion for California good government since working at the Rose Institute for state and local government at Claremont. He also spent a year on the board of the League of Women Voters of California, and for 6 years on the board of the Los Angeles Education Partnership. Oscar Chavez is the Assistant Director of Human Services for the County of Sonoma in Northern California. He oversees the county's Upstream Investments Initiative, a policy framework designed to strengthen the community's ability to implement evidence-informed practices and shift funding toward prevention. He is also responsible for the Human Services Department's planning, research, and evaluation functions, as well as community and client engagement. Chavez serves as board president of the Latino Service Providers, is chair of the Sonoma County Community Development Commission, chair of First Five Sonoma, and for California Forward, Leadership Council board member. He is also co-chair of the California Stewardship Network, which is a statewide effort to promote regional collaboration and stewardship, also affiliated with California Forward, and is on the steering committee of Rise Together, a 9-county Bay Area initiative committed to ending poverty. And finally, Sean Flanagan. Sean is the director at the Legatum Institute, a London-based think tank with a global outreach and portfolio dedicated to helping create pathways from poverty to prosperity. He ran the team that created the U.S. Prosperity Index, which we'll be looking at today, measuring prosperity in 50 states and 829 counties in 8 selected states. This includes the 58 counties here in California, and we'll be exploring again that work here as well. Prior to working at the Institute, Sean spent 20 years working in the UK government in their statistical service, gathering data and producing analysis for government ministers and officials to inform and monitor government policy and performance. In 2012, he took up the role of head of statistics at the Association of British Insurers, where he ran a team producing data on the UK insurance industry. And between 2016 and 2018, Sean was the Senior Director of Evidence and Insight at Girl Effect, formerly a part of the Nike Foundation, where he ran a large global team of analysts and researchers that gathered the data to inform, monitor, and evaluate the Girl Effect's media programs that empowered adolescent girls in developing countries to take control of their lives. And with those introductions, I will stop my screen share. Welcome you all in here to the Dean's Conference Room at Pepperdine, and very grateful again that you all have joined us for what I know you'll find to be an inspiring and enlightening conversation. Quick note on logistics and the agenda for today. Typical of the School of Public Policy, we're going to begin with two presentations, one on the Prosperity Index from Sean, the next on the California Dream Index by Patrick. Then we'll welcome in the one who's doing this work on the ground, Oscar Chavez, to talk more about how the use of data dashboards is helping to shape and form his work there in Sonoma County. Then we'll open it up to a conversation for the next half hour or so, and then we'll be reserving the last 15 to 20 minutes for your questions. I welcome those through the chat feature at any time during the conversation. If you hear something you'd like to ask one of the panelists about, or all the panelists, feel free to click on the chat feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen, type in your question. Just know we'll be getting to those questions in the last 15 or 20 minutes of our time together. Also, this session is being recorded. I know we had somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 or so registrants for this, and all of those who registered will be getting the link to the recording. And as we'll talk about at the end, we welcome your sharing this out. The impact of these seminars is not just in the live conversation, if you will, but also in those you share it with. So we welcome your sharing out the recording, which you should get within 24 hours of our time here together. The School of Public Policy here at Pepperdine University is focused on finding ways to better engage the public in policy making. One of the phrases that we often use is that we're about putting the public back into public policy. The question, of course, is how you do that. And one of the ways is making the quantitative aspects of what can be very complex data decisions more understandable through the use of data, and specifically data visualizations. I'm so excited today to welcome in a couple experts working in this field that are looking for ways to better include the public in policy making, and to do that through access to a variety of data sources, distilling them down and displaying them in ways that better inform the public, so that they can take this information and become better aware of the impact of policies on their everyday lives, but also seek ways to also promote these dashboards as well. I want to begin with welcoming in my friend Sean Flanagan from the Legatum Institute, who's going to kick us off with a look at the work that the Institute is doing around the Prosperity Index, something that is both global, national, and even county level in nature. And with that, Sean, I turn the microphone over to you.
Thanks very much, Pete. It's great to be with everyone today. I'm just going to get this so hopefully it displays better. There we go. Yeah, so thank you, Pete. Really appreciate you hosting us today, and big thanks to Pepperdine University for the time. I've really enjoyed getting to know you and working with you on the Prosperity Index, and just want to thank you for your continued support with it. I think you've been on 2, if not 3 panels on the USPI so far, so thank you for that. And yeah, well, welcome everybody. I just wanted to talk through a little bit of the US Prosperity Index. Some of you may be familiar with it, but some of you maybe not. So as Pete mentioned, we at the Legatum Institute are about creating pathways from poverty to prosperity. And by prosperity, we mean a combination of both economic and social well-being. And it's both of those working hand in hand. But what does that mean? What does economic and social well-being mean? Well, sort of unpacking that a little bit further, we've developed this taxonomy, and this is basically the structure of the index. And I'll just briefly talk through it so it makes some sense before we go into looking at some analysis. There is also a video that we have on what is prosperity, and I think Rebecca from the Legatum team is going to pop that in the chat, and we'll pop some things in the chat as we go along so you can just have those for later reference. But there are three broad domains of prosperity: inclusive societies, open economies, and empowered people. So inclusive societies are those aspects that are required to create a cohesive society that builds strong institutions and that enables people to have good relationships with each other. And there is a strong social contract with the state. So here we're looking at things like safety and security through crime, personal freedom, governance, and social capital. The open economies domain then captures everything that is required to create a strong economy. So here we're looking at the business environment. So does it have good access to credit? Is there sort of low and limited levels of regulation that support businesses rather than hinder? We also look at the things like communications, transport, electricity, water. And then the final domain, empowered people, is what is the lived experience of individuals in the society? So here we're capturing things like living conditions, their access to material resources, nutrition, but also how connected they are. We look at the health of a society, education through the different stages of pre and also K-12, and onto university and tertiary. And then finally, the natural environment. So all of these things, these three domains, these 11 pillars, and these 48 policy-focused elements, really intended as a dashboard, as a way of presenting the information to policymakers and others, particularly at the element level, which is really meant to inform and identify where there are weaknesses in a society and how can they then be addressed. But the index provides that full holistic view, a full dashboard view of all the things that state leaders, county leaders, and others will have interest in. So we then, underneath each of these elements, have 4 to 8 indicators per element. So what we end up with is an index have got these 11 pillars, 48 elements, 216 indicators in total. For the 50 states of the Union and DC, 829 counties, including the 58 in California. And then there's also 11 years worth of data so you can track trends. So what you might be asking, does the data show? So what I want to do in these next few slides actually is not just talk about the USPI. I want to also talk about the USPI and the CDI together, how they complement each other, how they can be used together. So on the left-hand side, what we see there is how in the empowered people domain, it translates across the 58 counties. So if you take all 829 counties in the index and put them into quintiles, this is how they rank in California. So you can see there's quite a broad mix. If you cast your eye across to the right, which is the aggregate score for the 10 indicators in the CDI, you'll see that actually there are similar patterns in terms of how that displays. So there's a strong correlation between the empowered people domain and also in the CDI. There are obviously other indicators in the CDI that cover other domains, but when looking at this, most of them seem to sort of sit in there. So if we then look in a bit deeper, let's take a county that's of close interest to one of the panelists. If we look at Sonoma County, we see that they both do pretty well. This county does pretty well in both of the indexes. But then if we look at that in a bit more detail, on the left-hand side here, what we've got is the profile for Sonoma County through the USPI. This is the front page. And what's highlighted in the red box is how Sonoma County has performed over the past decade. So it's in the third decile of all 829 counties. So it's a strong performer. And its prosperity has improved over the past decade. And on the right-hand side, we see when they look at the aggregate score for Sonoma County, that's also seen an improvement. So it's improving, it's strengthening. But if we look at a particular area where there may be something to address, and it was interesting talking to Oscar yesterday when we were having a pre-chat just about how some of the challenges, he actually mentioned housing as one of the challenges. So in the USPI, we have the element which is living conditions in the top box. And then in the bottom box, we have the elements that make up living conditions. And you'll see there one called shelter. And actually that Sonoma County is 10th in the county index. So it's in the lowest decile. So if we then sort of, okay, then pivot that and say, okay, how does that translate to home ownership, which is one of the indicators within the CDI? So what we've got here on the bottom left is a chart showing home ownership, and then using the greater level of disaggregation that's available in the CDI, you can break that down by income levels. And you see here, whilst there is some difference in depending on the level of income in the primary residence, actually there's not a big difference. So, okay, let's look at another way of disaggregating or disseminating that data in a bit more detail. So here, if we look at ethnicity, we actually see a much bigger disparity in the different ethnic groups in terms of home ownership. And actually, it might be a bit small, but what this shows is that people who are from a white community are 2.5 times more likely to own their home than somebody from as a Native American in Sonoma County. So there's some big differences here, and that is obviously an area that then I think would require further interrogation and doing a deep dive. So what you have really is like a sort of the USPI is like a T, if you want, and the CDI is like a T. You have the USPI, which is broad and holistic, covers all the different aspects of prosperity. But then you can dig a bit deeper and understand the different groups of society and how they are affected differently through the CDI. So I just wanted to say all of this information is available on our website, and the index, county index, has been constructed in a way that not only can you look at counties within California and how they're performing relative to each other, you can also look at how counties are performing relative to counties in other states. And there may be, solutions or opportunities that other states are doing that could be useful to reflect on how to improve certain aspects of prosperity within California. So finally, I just wanted to say that all of this information is available on the website. It's all open source. Rebecca will put it in the chat, usprosperity.net. And there is a profile for every single county, state, which allows you full transparency on all those different measures within the index. And then for each of the 58 counties in California, there is a profile which again allows you to interrogate and understand the strengths and weaknesses and the areas that perhaps need to be invested and given attention to, which can then be supplemented with additional information in the CDI. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much. I'll hand back to Pete.
Thanks so much, Sean. That's a great way to get us off and running here. And I really like your metaphor of the T in comparing and combining, understanding how both the Prosperity Index and the Dream Index can work together to inform Californians. And I deeply appreciate the work that you're doing across the country and across the world, really, which provides us as Californians with ways of comparing how we're doing with other, between counties, between states, and even between states and other nations. The ability to take the broad-based look and then to drill down through the great work that people like Patrick Atwater are doing at California Forward and the California Dream Index, which has just recently been launched. I'll say in full transparency, I'm a board member of this great nonprofit organization, but really respect the work that they're doing, especially around data-driven decision-making and civic engagement. And so with that, Patrick, we'll bring you in to talk about the California Dream Index.
Thank you, Pete and Sean, for that kind introduction and comparison of the Prosperity Index and the Dream Index. So what do we mean by the California Dream? California is somewhat unique among the 50 states in tying its identity to this kind of dream of a better life. And with the California Dream Index, we're really focused on tracking the factors that are really correlated with long-term economic mobility, meaning the ability of one generation to do better and earn more than their parents. And if you were born in 1940 in California, you had approximately a 90% chance of out-earning your parents. And if you were born in 1980, that has declined to a little bit less than a coin flip. And as we look to address that kind of long-term, challenge of improving the economic opportunity and mobility in the state, one thing I really want to say at the outset is, it's really great to work with, partners like the Legatum Institute that provide kind of a national and global perspective, because what we're really committed to with the Dream Index project is really bringing data and evidence and building a community of practice to inform public policy. There's really kind of no magic index that's going to get all the things that we care about exactly right. But what we really want to do is help make sure that this data and evidence is used to inform public policy, so that we can be really clear-eyed about where we have challenges and where there are successes and where we can really make improvement. So what are those factors that constitute the California Dream Index? It's very, a bit more focused. It's 10 indicators. We don't have quite as many as the Prosperity Index, but what we're looking at is, very basic question, answering very basic questions that you might have as a Californian. Can you afford to own a home? Is the rent too high? How is the internet? Can you get access to high quality broadband internet? How do jobs pay an income that you can actually afford the cost of living here? Is the water clean? Is the air good to breathe? Is there good early childhood education? Do you have how are career technical education and college, is that providing the skills that we need? With that, similar, I wanted to kind of dive into Sonoma County to give you a flavor of how these play out, because what we really did in choosing these is we wanted to be very parsimonious so that you could get kind of a quick snapshot and provide kind of an ongoing way of tracking how we're doing with economic mobility. Because when you're talking about intergenerational economic mobility, that's not something that you can see month to month or year to year. That's something that happens over generations. But all these 10 indicators are things that we saw with an empirical connection to economic mobility that really comes out of a lot of the work of Raj Chetty and some of his pioneering work around the decline of the American dream. And also things that we work on and that we see our opportunities, whether real leverage points for policies to kind of move the needle and uplift economic mobility. So looking at Sonoma, one area where you see a real success story is in the Prosperous Neighborhoods vertical. And this is really kind of the inverse of areas of concentrated poverty. So it's looking at where are there areas where the percent of residents that live in areas where there's more than 20% living under the federal poverty line. And if you know the federal poverty line, that's a national metric primarily based around food. And for much of California, this is a costly place to live. So it's the federal poverty line is a lot of folks would say it's kind of very much a kind of more of an extreme poverty line in California if you're below that. But this is an area where Sonoma is doing very well and very strong, that you can see both regionally and within the county. And then kind of on the other side of the equation, digging a bit deeper into the we may have noticed we have a housing crisis, and that's a big issue, as Sean mentioned. Sonoma County does a bit better as a whole than California in terms of home ownership, though there is a bigger gap between, particularly with the Latino community as well as the Native American community, as Sean mentioned. And you see that's actually going, when you look at the trend in home ownership over the past decade, and this is a period of, it was an period of economic expansion, right? Like the state went from the world's 9th to the 5th largest economy. And then you see there's actually a decline in home ownership in Latinos in Sonoma County. And this is something that's been going on, this challenge is something that's been building for a long time. If you go back to 1980, the percent of young Californians ages 18 to 34 who were able to own a home was actually double what it is today. And over that time, the percent of young Californians who live at home is actually increased by 100% since 1980. So there's many more young Californians who aren't able to own a home, which is difficult if you're trying to, like start raising a family, things like that, and many more that are still just, living with their parents. And then looking at the percent of, Black Californians as a whole who owned a home was actually higher in the 60s when there were a lot of, more explicitly racist policies than today. So a lot of challenges in the home ownership area, and might want to look though, more real time in terms of, okay, so we're in this COVID crisis and we're looking to recover out of it. How can we use this as an opportunity to address some of these long-term trends? And where are we at today? And we can see in Sonoma County that this is one of our resources in the Dream Index resource portal, tracking the number of small businesses open. And it's actually a bit lower than the state as a whole. It's around 42% lower than what it was at the start of the pandemic. The state as a whole is around 36%. And there's a very real question as we look to recover, how many of those will reopen, and how we can really recover thoughtfully. And you see the similar kind of story with, consumer spending is pretty strong. There's a lot of talk around that nationally, though it's a bit lower in Sonoma County than the state as a whole, which is around flat actually, with the latest information. And those are kind of key data points as we look to, because I think what we talk a lot about at California Forward is we want to be clear-eyed about, where there was progress, where there were areas where there's emphatically not progress, like home ownership over the last decade, and how can we be thoughtful as we try to, rebuild, not just to where we were, but try to, build a California where there's, more economic opportunity and mobility for all. And the last thing I just want to say is just really, kind of emphasize, and I'll share the link in the chat where you can check out the Dream Index yourself. But, we have a tool where you can explore this. There's a portal where we link to a lot of other great resources, like some of these Raj Chetty data, the Legatum Institute, a bunch of other resources. We really see this as a starting point where we're really trying to build a community of people in California where, if we're clear-eyed, there's a lot of opportunity for California to kind of live up to its goals and values, and we're really trying to build a community of practice where we can be clear-eyed about where there have been successes and opportunities for improvement, and build a kind of community that's committed to using data and evidence to improve public policy so that we can get there. With that, I'll hand it back to you, Dean Peterson.
Thank you, Patrick. That was a great overview of the California Dream Index. I know that as we see that the link to the Dream Index for those who'd like to find out more is also in the chat feature. We welcome your exploring that as well. Well, now let's go from those who are analyzing the data and visualizing it to those that are implementing it and shaping policy with it. And for that conversation, delighted to welcome in Oscar Chavez at the oft-mentioned Sonoma County. Oscar, great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, in our prep call earlier, you had a great phrase that I want to make sure that we integrate here. It helps describe the work that you do in Sonoma County. For those of you, you saw the map, but for those of you maybe outside the state or even outside the country, Sonoma County is just outside the Bay Area, a little north of San Francisco on the coast here of the great state of California. You describe your work as being situated within a results-based accountability framework. Talk a little bit about how you define that and how the data dashboard and specifically the Dream Index is helping in your work.
Great. Thank you so much, Dean Peterson. I'm excited to be here. And one of the things that we've been doing is looking at dashboards and these different matrices or indices for a number of years. And we often say that we want to be data driven and evidence informed. But what the heck does that really mean? And policymakers, they use that kind of language all of the time. We want to hold people accountable to achieving results. One of the things that we've learned is that to be able to do that, to be able to deliver services with that kind of rigor, requires greater investments in supporting the social service sector to be able to operate at that level. So to the county's credit here in Sonoma County, we, over the last 10 years through the Upstream Investments Initiative, we have been investing in providing training and technical assistance to our nonprofit and county partners on the importance of using data, the importance of evaluation, of using evaluation to inform how you can improve your programs. And we recently implemented the results-based accountability framework. And this is a way of helping us to understand, how much are we investing in community? How well are we doing it? To what extent are we using evidence to inform our practice? And most importantly, is anybody better off as a result of our investments? A lot of the funding that we get is to measure output, how many units of service that you provide. But they don't really get at whether or not your services actually improve the quality of life for the residents in your community. And that's the orientation that we want to shift in the way that we invest in our community and in the way that we support the social service system itself to be more data-driven and evidence-informed. And through this results-based accountability framework, we understand, and what the DREAM Index tells us is here are the larger population level indicators that we want to shift. If we look at home ownership or wages, if wages are low and we want to increase wages, particularly for our lower wage workers, we need to understand, based on the data, what programs do we need to invest in? And by understanding what investments we're making, we can see how those efforts are contributing to moving the needle on those larger population level indicators. And if they're not moving in the direction that we want them to go, then we go through this exercise, what we call turn the curve, really understand, why isn't the curve trending in the direction that we wanted? What are the factors behind this? Who is responsible for this? Who needs to be at the table? And what strategies might work so that we can get us back to the right direction? So this is about developing a local discipline for how we can be more data-driven and evidence-informed and better direct the few resources that we have in our community. We are doing this right now with our contracts, and every year we're going to be adding additional more contracts, and we're also training our internal departments to use this results-based accountability framework. And more importantly, all of this information gets rolled up into a public-facing dashboard where we can aggregate the data from the performance of the actual contract to how different county departments are doing, to how the county as a whole is doing, and then linking that to how we're faring when we compare our work with the California Dream Index. So, this didn't happen overnight. It's been a huge investment on the part of the county. But what we've learned is this, is that you have to have the long view. I mean, you cannot do this, for 2 to 3 years and forget about it. We didn't get into these problems overnight, and it might take a generation to really move the needle, but we have to make a commitment. We also have to make a commitment to evaluation and evaluating our programs and actually investing in those organizations that are doing this work. And we have to be disciplined about understanding what works. And when something isn't working, let's pivot and let's take a different approach rather than doing the same thing, only to not move the needle on the indicators that we want to move. So this is a very, very important discussion. And the index really helps us to take very complex issues and be able to craft or write a narrative for how we can involve the whole community
Mm.
in creating and improving the well-being of our community. And that's been sort of our journey here in Sonoma County.
Oscar, that's a great setup, and especially your last words there about including the whole community. I think one of the lenses that's helpful to explore the impact of these dashboards, which you do on a regular basis there in Sonoma County, is to understand that the results of the displays of the dashboards aren't just intended for those within government and the work they're doing, but it's also a tool that you can then use to go out into the community, whether it's community-based organizations that are also providing services or others that are interested, to provide them with information and also to let them know how they're doing. It's really just, it's not just for government, but it's also for connecting the community if you're putting these larger dream indicators, if you will, at the center, as opposed to what individual departments or nonprofits or agencies are doing.
No, you're absolutely right. And a very important point to make is how can we provide meaningful data to people, particularly those that are dealing with a lot of these issues. And we worked with Measure of America to publish the Portrait of Sonoma, where we looked at two communities, about 5 miles apart from each other, but who had very different lived experience. You had life expectancy differences of about 10 years. You had one community with almost 100% graduation rate versus 56% for the other community. You had incomes that were in excess of 25,000 on average versus those living in another community. And what the portrait told us is that how is it that these communities could be so close together but be living very different experiences? And from a policy perspective, what can we do to bring people who are furthest away from opportunity to have the necessary resources to be able to achieve the California dream? And so we're shifting the conversation away from our what we usually say is why are you poor, and moving to a more deeper and important conversation about what are the community conditions that are conspiring against the well-being of so many hardworking people to achieve the California dream. And this is what these indices and what this data can help inform a more rich conversation and discussion about how we can create a more inclusive community, and what are the policy levers that we can pull to actually accelerate change. And by arming residents with this knowledge, they're actually doing advocacy on their own, and they're sharing this information with their elected officials, and they're saying, look, how come we're not having the same kind of opportunity that these other communities? Why haven't you invested at the same rate that you're investing in other neighborhoods? And that's the kind of conversations that we ought to be having across our state.
I want to bring back Sean and Patrick into the conversation as we talk about how and who's the audience for these dashboards. I think what's remarkable about the work that Legatum does and the work that California Forward does is that you are extra governmental organizations, but you're seeking to influence policy. And obviously, as Oscar said, that policy can be influenced from within government, but also those working outside government. Sean, I'll begin with you. You've given the phrase that I'm committed to conferring here on the audience, that your work within UK government was transitioning from policy-based evidence making to evidence-based policy making, which I just think is such a great phrase that I hope we all take and make near and dear to our hearts as we do this work. Tell us a little bit about your experience with that transition and how it's important that we understand, whether you're inside government or outside government, the importance of using evidence-based decisions rightly.
Yeah, I think it's something that we all come with, is that sense of unconscious bias or prejudices or we see the world in a different way to other people. And I think what data does is it actually presents the world as it really is. And that's it. So it strips everything back to actually being very objective. Now, I'm not saying that an index gives you the solutions, but it provides you with the opening conversation to understand, how things are, what is the current position, so that you can then start asking the questions. Well, why are things like this? What has led to this position being? And that's where you get the most powerful policy making. And I think, ministers in UK government, and I'm hoping I'm not breaching any ministerial codes here, but they would come in and they would have what I would used to call their pet projects, and they were things that they wanted to do, and they were going to jolly well do them. Doesn't matter what anybody said, and no civil servant or government official would stop them. And so, over time, I think they became. I'm caricaturing to make a point, but it is that sense that data is really important to really understand the lay of the land. And I think you're right. The advantage of CDI and us being outside government is that we can be impartial. And I would also say that, as well as these indexes being really useful for shaping policy, they're also really useful for holding government to account. So can you see an improvement in housing over the past 4 years that, a state government has been in office? Can you see an improvement in health? Can you see, have they delivered on their promises? And being outside of government, that provides that impartiality that you can exist. But also we want the indexes to be used by government. So there's a fine balance. But I think, we've seen in our global index that we produce, we're working with governments in country to help use the index supplemented with deep research about these countries to really understand what are the binding constraints that are holding back progress. And it's those things coming together that you can really get the most effective policy making, I think.
Patrick, I want to come to you about the DREAM Index. I think one of the important questions that we need to ask for those of us who are supportive of evidence-based policy making, and especially the use of dashboards to make policy and its impact more understandable, is that we're not naive to the fact that we are making decisions about what indicators we're going to use to help define and understand the impact of policy. You laid out for the DREAM Index the different indicators that you all and the team at California Forward have shown, and Sean has shown where there's an overlap between the Prosperity Index and the DREAM Index. Tell us a little bit about your work and the team's work when you were just beginning the process of the DREAM Index to consider what indicators you were going to use, which ones would be helpful, and which ones weren't going to be.
Happy to. And one thing to note, so, I've been with California Forward for a year. The DREAM Index has been in development for a little under 3 years. And there was a whole process around engaging with various stakeholders around the state, and really kind of listening and learning around what people saw as their top priorities, as well as looking at what do we see empirically is really connected to long-term economic mobility. And we really took kind of a pass through kind of a couple filters. One, we really wanted to make sure that we can break down all these data across all of California's diverse regions, because regional, looking at, California is a state of 40 million people. We want to see how this is looking differently across all of California, and as well as looking at it through the lens of race, and seeing how California's different communities are doing along these different indicators, so that we can really be kind of clear-eyed about how that is playing out. Really look also, what are the things that, we are working on? So what are the areas that we can make an improvement? A way, we can take really, kind of the long view. We want this to be around for the long time. When we look at, like the challenges that Oscar mentioned about those two communities, and that's a story that happens in a lot of California. And we want to be very clear, that didn't happen overnight. Yep. Not going to get solved overnight. When we look at things like that, or the housing crisis, we want to be able to track that and really take kind of the long view about how, where is their progress and how can we continue to work and really, move the needle.
Yeah. No, I think that's helpful. We're going to get to some questions now. And again, we welcome your questions in the chat feature. Simply type those in and we'll get to those in turn. That's a natural segue to a good question from Chris. And Oscar, I'm going to send this your way. The question from Chris Fulcher: how does the level of geographic aggregation, county versus tract, inform or mask reality? And what impact might this have on public policy? We've looked at the different lenses here, racial and ethnic lenses that you have been using there to understand that even if a top line data score on home ownership or whatever the case might be may not be telling the true story, does the county level, does the geographic piece help with that as well, or do you dive down even more deeply, maybe by combining where predominantly ethnic neighborhoods are versus non? Tell us about that.
Yeah, no, this is a very important question that is being asked. And one of the things that counties need is to get more of that granular data. And so the reason why we use the Measure of America report, it assigned a human development score to each of the 99 census tracts so that we can compare between census tracts, because at the aggregate level, you don't get a good look at what is really happening. And to illustrate this as an example, when we looked at education, like graduation rates, we see that Sonoma County does very well. When we disaggregate along race, ethnicity, we see that our Latino population is not achieving well in terms of graduation rates. So we, for example, put together a Latino scorecard for the County of Sonoma, where we lifted up the fewest, most important indicators that we should be addressing over the next 10 years that could help close the gaps. And to no surprise, it is home ownership. We've talked about the fact that Latinos' home ownership rates are lower than whites. And so we want to understand what can we do to increase home ownership, because that has been the single most important vehicle to build wealth. How can we close the education gap, increase political participation and engagement, neighborhood engagement? You have a lot of our low-income Latinos living in sort of geographic isolation. And so by getting to that granular level, comparing neighborhoods, we're able to tell a much more informed story. So we need both the granular and the higher level data to compare to other counties as well.
Sean, I want to take this question to you in your direction as well, because I can foresee, and I know I've heard from you in describing the great work of the Prosperity Index. One of the advantages of geographic aggregation is that you can develop a certain sense of competition between and among states, counties, even nations. And that can be a powerful stimulant to public policy making headed in a particular direction around issues of prosperity. Tell us a little bit about the importance of understanding the geographic context here.
Yeah, I think there's always a trade-off in this between data availability, and I include with that reliability, accuracy. So the challenge with the more granular you go spatially, the less reliable or the less available data becomes. And so, I completely agree that you need supplementary information to inform decisions, but you have to also look at the level of governance that I think exists. And obviously there's a huge amount of decisions that are made at state level, and there's a huge amount of decisions made at county level. So having that information at those spatial levels is really important. But how you then spend that money and what you prioritize absolutely requires more supplementary information. I completely concur with that. I think your point around healthy competition is, as we've gone around the states with the USPI and promoting it, it's it's there and it's good, because I think everybody wants to do better than their neighbor, right? It's a probably a human trait that exists. So, But I think the USPI, because it covers all 50 states and all, at the moment, 829 counties, we want to, in 8 states, we want to broaden that out to cover all 3,100, is that's really helpful because the index is constructed in a way that allows you to compare with any other county, your county with any other county. It provides the opportunity to see, well, where are others getting this right and what are they doing? So an example I cited was we were looking at Colorado and looking at particularly the idea that urban counties generally are more prosperous than rural, but there are certain aspects of prosperity where rural perform better, you know, but generally speaking, urban does better than rural. We found some counties in Colorado where that wasn't the case, and these aren't your traditional, the high leisure ones in Colorado like Aspen or anything like that. But I wanted to understand why are they performing so well. And when I did just a bit of digging, a bit of research, Dr. Google, as I call it, you know, it's really interesting. I found they created this collaborative partnership across all the different business community, across local government. And they formed this sort of conscious collaboration where they were getting together to really understand collectively what are the challenges that their county is facing, and then how do they best overcome them. And I think that's a really important point, is that it's the collaborative approach of government, of business, of philanthropy, of them consciously coming together to use the data to really inform who, not only what needs to happen, but who needs to make that happen. I think that's where the power really lies.
No, I think that focus on cross-sector leadership, that's certainly something Oscar touched on before. I really, that's such an important concept here at the policy school, I'll say, but that's very, very helpful. Next question from Quentin, a nice shout out to Pepperdine in our work here. Quentin writes, Pepperdine has been recognized for its expertise in civic engagement. How could civic engagement play a role, not just in using these indicators and indices, but in helping to shape them? And this touches back, Patrick, I know the actual formation of the indicators was a little bit before your time, but for you first, and I would say I've seen this as well on dashboards at the municipal level around the concept of priority-based budgeting, where cities have really used priority-based budgeting as a way of doing public engagement to inform what the priorities of the local government should be, and then matching those priorities with policy levers. Tell us a little bit about how the public can be engaged at the front end in creating these dashboards.
Yeah, so when we were choosing these indicators, there's a whole exercise that both kind of predates and we kind of continued when I came on board around choosing, what were the indicators, and then also when we're looking at the DREAM Index, we don't just have the 10 indicators, but we'll have a whole resource portal, or we're seeing this as a starting point. So right now we're going through, Oscar had the clever idea of doing a roadshow with all of the California Forwards regions. And as we're doing that, listening to folks about what other resources they would like to see using, right? So like, what are the other things that are really particularly locally important? Because what you can get there, I mean, it kind of ties into the previous question about the geographic aggregation, because, the reason we use counties is because that's what, like the Census Bureau, it's kind of what everyone uses. It's not the perfect geographic unit. Like when we talk to like our friends in Tahoe, for example, those counties stretch into the Sacramento region, and that's where the bulk of the population is. But, all the area around Tahoe is very different in terms of, tourism. They have kind of a issue of being like a bit of a Zoom town. So that, the phrase where people are teleworking from there right now. And so I think, we've really trying to use, just be really intentional and really, really responsive as we're hearing from other people, because there's a lot of that local context. Like, sometimes our partners are doing things like surveys, like things, and that would just be just for their specific region, or doing things like, other data collection, and all that's really valuable and provides, really critical complementary insights to just the the baseline, because I think the value of a baseline is, it definitely emits a lot, but it provides, but also by emitting a lot, you provide more the ease of providing the sort of comparisons and that you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's just a starting point.
No, that's very good. Sean, to you, how, the Prosperity Index, as you showed at the beginning, is very comprehensive across pillars and topic areas, policy areas. Tell us how it was formulated and how you went through the process of bringing questions in and leaving others out.
Yeah, so we drew upon our expertise from doing it for 15 years at a global level, and we took the sort of our global understanding of what leads to a truly prosperous life, and then we sort of laid it onto the US, and we actually recognize we're not US experts, but we're experts in measurement. So we pulled in a team of about 40 experts, and there were about three to four per pillar. So we had four education experts, 4 social capital experts, and we walked through with them, what does prosperity look like in the US? So that taxonomy, that framework I showed you, was very much created collaboratively with those experts. Mm. And then we embarked on, well, if we've got those policy elements, let's take early K-12 education, for example. How do you best measure that? What would success look like? What are the best proxy indicators? And they really helped us identify what data sets we should be using in the US to help best proxy those. But yeah, we had some full-on conversation, shall we say, with the different experts, the different views, and that really helped, I think. Now, we could have done that one-on-one, right? And then tried to put it together. But actually, we found there was real strength in the getting 4 experts together from academia, from think tanks, from research institutes in the US, and sort of really hammering this out together with us. So that was fun. But, there's no perfect data. I would say, yeah. You've got to go with what's out there and make sure you use it most effectively. But the absence of not using it is you end up with ineffective and inappropriate policies.
Well, we're up against, this hour has flown. We're up against the top of the hour. We'll probably run a few minutes over. I want to thank you all, Sean and Patrick and Oscar. I have one more question to ask, but just wanted to take the moderator's prerogative to remind everyone that within the next 24 or 48 hours, you'll be getting a link to this video. We'll also be posting it to the School of Public Policy's YouTube page, but we do welcome your sharing this. I think at least I hope you found this not only to be informative, but inspiring. The use of data, not only internally within government, but externally in civic engagement, is becoming more and more important as we think about policymaking. And the examples that we have here, both of the DREAM Index and the Prosperity Index, are great examples, and Oscar's work in bringing this to ground, I just think is exemplary. So thank you to all for joining us. My last question, and this is going to speak to the policymakers in our audience, those who have not been using data dashboards, have heard a lot of talk about it, wondering how to get started in it. I think it would be important for those to know that one of the significant commitments, if this is going to be a direction that you go, if dashboards are going to be a way that you formulate something about the how of how you do public policy in the future, it does demand an ongoing commitment. I think what's been important about the work that you're doing, Sean, at the Legatum Institute, what the work that's happening at California Forward, and your work too, Oscar, in Sonoma County, is that this isn't just about a single snapshot. While it may be posted at a certain point of time, maybe reflecting what's happened over the last year, it really is about committing to this way of informing the public over years, so that both policymakers and the public understand whether progress is indeed being made or not on these indicators. And so, Sean, I want to begin with you and just to say, how how have you thought about, and I've heard the phrase several times on this panel, the longer game of using data dashboards to influence and inform policymakers over time?
Yeah, I think that that's right, Peter. It's not a sort of one-off attempt. It requires ongoing commitment, and a lot of these things, it's worthwhile bearing in mind or calling out. A lot of these things take time as well. Policy is not going to change overnight, or if it does, then question the long term. So it requires long-term commitment. But I think both indicators, both indexes are really useful for where are we now. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses across these 10 indicators or across the policy elements within the USPI? What are our strengths? And I think it's good to focus on those as well, because you want to build on those strengths. You want to make sure that you're continuing to devote time, energy, if necessary, resources to keep going. You don't want to turn your attention to another part of the fire and this gets neglected, right? So the next thing then is to say, okay, how do you then, having identified the weaknesses, who holds those policy levers to make those changes? Which level does it exist? Is it multiple agencies? Is there a need for a collaboration? And then beginning the task of actually, this is where we are now, get the policy implementation, and then you track that progress. And you must be prepared to play the waiting game a little bit. I think one of the things I like about the Dream Index is the additional sort of indicators that you've got as sort of quick proxies as to whether things are changing. Because these indexes sometimes, because they're backward looking, they take a little while. You sometimes need a bit more real-time data to help guide you as to whether you're beginning to see the things, the change that you want to see. And I think that's important, because we all want to see measures of early success, right? We don't want to be saying, I've done this policy, I've now got to wait 2.5 years till it comes through in the data before I can see it. You need to know earlier, because if the ship's going in the wrong direction, you need to turn it sooner than 2.5 years. So I think using real-time measures that give you some kind of traction, but then long-term sticking with it and using these indexes to see, okay, we're beginning to see the change we hope to see.
Patrick, and we'll conclude with you, Oscar. Patrick, tell us a little bit about how California views the phrase you used before, the longer game, as it pertains to the use of data dashboards to inform policymakers.
Yeah, I mean, as we look to come out of this, kind of unique moment that we're in with COVID, we're really looking very hard as an organization around how we can rebuild not just to where we were, but really take a clear-eyed look about how we can address some of these, long-term trends and build more equitable economies across the state. So we have a whole Equitable Economies Initiative. We have a webinar series that happens every Thursday at 11 a.m. That we'd be able to share. And we're taking like a very holistic look at how we can look at housing doesn't just happen in isolation. You also have to be thinking about can people are there jobs that pay enough that people can pay? It's both like an income and a cost question. So questions around transportation. There's also questions around wildfires are a thing here. So like forest. So we take a very integrated and kind of holistic approach with California Forward. We try to see how all these things come together to be cliche so that we can move California forward.
Very good. Oscar, let's conclude with you again. These are not insignificant policy challenges, whether we're talking about economic development or education or housing. And so expecting immediate progress on these is difficult. And as Sean mentioned, most of the data that we're displaying is looking back a bit. So tell us about the importance as a policymaker to making a longer term commitment to the use of data visualization and policymaking.
Excellent question. You know, our tagline is, you know, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And so we always talk about the discipline to take the long view. The
Mm,
reality is that a lot of our elected officials want results in 4-year cycles. These are the election cycles, and so they need to demonstrate that they're actually, you know, getting results. And so it's a fine balance. But what I think is equally important is this idea of democratizing the data to make it
mm,
understandable, from an engagement perspective. You know, how do we bring community together to understand the facts that we're looking at? How do we build knowledge together so that we can get to solutions much faster? And that's what we're trying to do, is to find meaning around these complex issues. Like, we know that housing policy is economic policy, is education policy, is health policy. It is all interrelated. And so there isn't one silver bullet, right? But there's this idea of a silver buckshot, that if we can take, you know, if we can start to address a series of issues, then over time we can start to move the needle. But we do need some of these proxy measures, or these benchmarks along the way, that can keep people engaged and motivated and continue to invest in this important work that we're doing. This is hard work. Policymaking is hard work. And I think our job as public servants is to arm our elected officials with the best information that we have, so that they can make the best informed decision to benefit the well-being of the people they serve.
well, I can't think of a better way to conclude what has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for that. Oscar, you've given us now 2 of the 3 catchphrases, which I hope are our takeaways here as an audience. Democratizing data. Let's be thinking about that as it relates to the use of data visualizations and data dashboards. Results-based accountability frameworks. That's another one I think is a great way to think about how and the why of using these dashboards. And Sean, your phrase, moving from policy-based evidence making to evidence-based policy making, I think is such an important part of the work that we're all doing. And so again, I want to thank you for the work that you do, and for this time in talking about it. Again, for our audience, within the next 24 or 48 hours, you'll be getting not only a link to this video, which we hope you'll share with your networks, but also a number of the links that have been embedded in the chat feature as well. We'll make sure those are included in the email that we send out. So much of the impact of our webinars are not only in our live discussions, but where these links to the videos are then forwarded out to. And so we hope you'll take that opportunity to share what has been a great conversation. I did see a question from Cassandra about this, the other videos that we do. You're welcome to join, subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's Pepperdine SPP, where you'll find more webinars like this, and certainly announcements about more to come. So from the Graduate School of Public Policy here at Pepperdine in rainy Malibu, California, I want to thank you all for joining us here, and look forward to seeing you next time at our next event or webinar. Thanks so much for joining us.